Holy moly, this episode has so much to break down, so let's get straight into it. Beginning with the opening scene, we get a much more dramatic soundtrack accompanying the title card. Significantly more dramatic than the previous soundtrack, letting us know that things are starting to get serious. As Luthen and Cassian make their escape, Luthen attempts to convince Cassian to join the rebel cause. Cassian seems rather disillusioned, pointing out that he once fought on Mimban for 2 years. Cassian then mentions that when he was 16, he got out of prison and was sent to Mimban, where it turns out he was fighting against his own people, which is super confusing. And Luthen calls him out on the lie, stating that he was only there for 6 months as a cook, which makes a whole lot more sense. Mimban is located in the expansion region of the galaxy, and since the Clone Wars has been hotly contested over various galactic-wide factions. The Separatists first invaded it, and a coalition of Mimban Liberation Army and the Republic was sent in to push the CIS out. The conflict would later evolve just as the Republic became the Empire, with the Mimban Liberation Army fighting against the Imperial Army, something which we previously saw in Solo. We then get our first look at Coruscant in the Andor show, and we follow the perspective of an ISB agent. The Imperial Security Bureau, or ISB for short, was the Imperial Secret Intelligence, carrying out plenty of covert operations, and at the time, headed by Admiral Yularen, who was seen fighting alongside Anakin plenty of times during the Clone Wars. So what we see here in this room isn't quite the top of the food chain just yet. One of the ISB agent mentions growing security concerns in the Ryloth sector. What's interesting here is that this is actually a reference to the events shown in the Bad Batch, or rather the effects of that event. In the Bad Batch, we see the beginning of Cham Syndulla's resistance against the Empire, and 14 years later, we can see that the resistance is still going strong. We then get a mention of Arvala 6, which is the first time the name is introduced. However, we have heard of an Arvala 7 before. In fact, we've seen it in Season 1 of The Mandalorian. This is where the Ugnaught Quill will eventually come to reside and where Mando will eventually meet Grogu. Again, another cool little detail. We then get to hear about increasing security for construction shipments to Scarif, the planet in which the Death Star plans were stored on in Rogue One. Again, this is just another reference to the construction of the Death Star, and this request was likely ordered by Director Krennic himself. Andor takes on a new alias, adopting the name Clem after his adopted father, which we saw back in episode 3. Luthen hands him a Kyber crystal as down payment. Kyber crystals were of course the crystals used to power lightsabers of Jedi, and depending on the type of crystal and where it came from, it can give off different types of colors. So this here seems to be a rather special one. Luthen mentions that it represents an uprising against the Rakatans. The Rakatans in Legends, but I guess are now canon, were an ancient alien species from the planet Lenin. And in a time way before the Old Republic, the Rakatan Infinite Empire ruled over much of the galaxy. According to Legends, they were also the empire that engineered several other species, such as the Twi'leks, to be used as slaves. So it's super cool that they've really brought back the idea of this ancient empire that once ruled the galaxy. The crystal also draws plenty of parallels, mirroring the struggle against the Rakatan Empire with the struggle against the Galactic Empire. We then are introduced to Vel. Now Vel is a possible reference to two different characters, both of them bounty hunters. This could be a reference to the character Sintas Vel, who was the wife of Boba Fett in Legends. The two would end up splitting over a tragedy, but not before Sintas gave birth, which would eventually lead to the daughter of Boba Fett, a woman by the name of Eileen Vel. But if I had to pick one, I think this would probably be closer to Sintas Vel since it matches the timeline better. It should also be noted that Sintas would later be trapped in carbonite, only to be revived 40 years later suffering from blindness and amnesia, something which an older Boba Fett and a Mandalorian turned Jedi by the name of Gotab would help her recover. So, potential hints to the Mandalorian Season 3 confirmed? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Luthen then goes on to mention that Andor spoke several different languages, among them Illyrian, Mayo, and Nari.
He speaks Illyrian, Mayo, Nari,
which are supposed to be names of languages, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Mayo actually refers to the name of an Abyssinian from the planet Bis, first seen in the Mos Eisley Cantina in A New Hope. Nari then refers to the Jedi we met in Kenobi, who was later killed by Inquisitors. So either these names are names of new languages that we've never heard of, or Luthen is just making things up as he goes along to convince Vel, which really isn't that far-fetched. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Back in the Morlani sector, the Empire has decided to take over, and all of the Preox guys are thrown under the bus. Another indication of how heavy-handed the Empire is becoming over the incident. Luthen, on his way back to Coruscant, transforms himself to another character entirely as part of his cover, which really is just a fantastic moment of acting from Skarsgård. One of the rebels is caught sleeping and gets reprimanded for it. We hear Saw Gerrera's name get mentioned, which is of course the infamous leader of the guerrilla movement on Jedha, and the show is expected to feature him somewhere down the line. We get a brief look at some goats with 4 horns. These are apparently called Korala, a new species introduced for the first time. Back on Coruscant, we see former Deputy Inspector Khan walk through what looks to be a sort of airport. An announcement is made in which several planets are mentioned, firstly Hosnian Prime, which would later be the capital of the New Republic and subsequently destroyed by the First Order. We also get Plexus, a small planet located in the core, which was known to house spice gangs such as the Zenowe Crime Society. Euphornus Major was also mentioned, which is another planet located in the core and like Coruscant was completely transformed into a massive city. We get a visit to Luthen's antique shop and boy is there a lot to unpack. Mon Mothma makes her first appearance, who mentions that this is indeed a special day for her husband as according to Chandrillan custom. Chandrilla was of course the home planet of Mon Mothma and was briefly the capital of the New Republic. In the background of the shop, we can actually see a Gungan shield, the same type used by the Gungans in the Battle of Naboo. We also get to see some Mandalorian armor, or at the very least the chestplate part of it. We also get to see Starkiller's armor from the game The Force Unleashed. This armor was known as the Sith Stalker armor, in which the armor itself was painfully grafted onto the skin of its wearer. It was commonly worn by Sith assassins, and due to its design, it permitted the user to use Force lightning without any side effects. It was first seen in the dark ending to the game, in which Starkiller would wear it after overthrowing Vader and becoming Palpatine's new apprentice, so it's super cool to see it make a return to canon here. Luthen mentions an Utapawan monk cudgel. This is of course coming from the world of Utapau, the scene of Kenobi and Grievous' last confrontation in Revenge of the Sith. We then get a brief look at some interesting looking slabs with some strange markings. These are in fact the same markings first seen in Rebels when Ezra unlocks the way to travel through time. The markings originated from the Ones, a family of extremely strong Force users who resided on the planet Mortis. The father, the son, and the daughter, each the embodiment of a different side of the Force. So it's pretty crazy to see these markings make an appearance here. We then get some neat camera work as the camera pans just as Luthen reverts back to his normal self. In the background, we can vaguely make out the shapes of a Jedi and Sith holocron. Again, the fact that Luthen has all this is really just a testament to his ability to find rare items. We also get to see a few slabs of carbonite, which is the same method used to capture Han Solo. Mon Mothma returns home to her obnoxious husband, who is preparing to entertain some guests. We then learn who is on the guest list, and we get some real deep cuts of a lot of obscure characters. We first hear the name Ars Dangor, who was an official that served on the ruling council of the Empire, acting as a senior advisor to Palpatine and was first introduced in the Return of the Jedi. We also get the name Sly Moore, who was simply known as the Umbaran. She was a female Force adept who served as the senior administrative aide and chief of staff to Palpatine. She first appeared in the Revenge of the Sith. Mon Mothma then points out that all these characters are from the Vizier's chambers, which is a reference to Mas Amida, who was the Vizier at the time. So really, what her husband has done is invited all of Mon Mothma's worst enemies to the dinner table. Mon Mothma then rips her husband a new one when she mentions that the shipping lanes to Gorman were cancelled, something which led to the peaceful protest on the planet and subsequently the Gorman massacre 3 years later in 2 BBY. Mon Mothma would in response condemn the massacre and personally name the Emperor responsible, something which caused the Empire to send out an order for her arrest. We get our first hints of ISB politics with some conflicts over jurisdictions and responsibilities. The planet Sev-Tok is briefly mentioned, which is a planet that used to be located in separatist space and suffered heavily from frequent earthquakes. So that is hopefully everything covered from episode 4 of the Andor show. Things appear to be shaping up quite nicely, and I have to say the amount of deep cuts and obscure references really help bring the world to life, and I am all here for it. So if there was anything that I missed, let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.